Hello. Whoops.
Hello.
And a good Saturday morning to all.
Hello.
Hello.
I might have to jump off a little early because I have a 1 o'clock call and I might have to take the dog out before that. I don't know. He woke me up early today, which he doesn't normally do. I was upstairs and I heard, he doesn't bark. He kind of like mowing. So I came downstairs. He ran to the door. He's almost 14 years old. So he's not always so quick. And I got dressed. We ran outside. He had to go. So it's been, that was at 7 this morning. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, understood. I actually went to bed really early last night, so I got up around 4:30, something like that.
You're really muddy. Your voice is really muddy this morning. Are you on a wrong mic or something?
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Maybe
I can
bring
make
it closer.
I can make it out,
Okay,
but
hang on 1 second.
it's diffused. It's muddy. But it's not fatal. It's just
No, let me adjust my microphone settings.
Oh, and you know what? Also put on the transcription.
Good idea.
yeah. Then we can see whether or not Otter can listen to you better than I can.
Okay, testing. Is that any better?
It just, to me, it sounds like you're far away. But what do I know?
I would venture to say that it's your voice from being tired. That's what I'm hearing. It's like more gravelly and a little bit muddy. Now,
In the morning, I always sound like I'm just going through puberty.
exactly. That's what I'm hearing. But that could just be me. I don't know, Barry.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's the same effect whether it's electronic or acoustic in the room, but
All right, let me try singing. Happy birthday.
That's worse.
Da, da,
That's
da.
worse.
that's terrible.
That's
That was
echoing
distorted.
and horrible.
That was distorted.
All right, let me try someplace else.
You only have one mic on that machine? Yeah, well then if it's the mic or the mic circuit, it's really nothing you can do about it unless you're really far away from it.
Okay, last try. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
We could hear you. We could
Yeah,
hear you.
well, we'll survive. I mean, it's just not high fidelity, that's all, but we can make it.
All right, let me go switch devices.
It's fairly powerful sound, isn't it? Yeah.
Just the muddier it is, the more likely I'm going to miss a key word in the middle of a sentence.
Okay, I'm testing to see whether the live transcript actually understands me. And it seems to do so. Okay. All right, I'll turn on the mic on my phone.
Nice. Yeah, we can see the live transcript.
Yeah, transcripts typically resolve at least half of the muddied words.
By the way, I can't be here all that long today. A little bit happening, but I thought I would at least say hello and be here a little bit in the beginning.
Oh, you're coming in on another account.
It's
Ah,
weird.
2 Sams.
He's out of sync with
Twice the
himself. Which machine is faster?
Okay, testing. How's
Much
that?
clearer,
Better.
much better audio. So it's the mic or it's something in that, what are you on, a laptop or desktop?
This is my Samsung phone.
Yeah, much better quality sound.
The previous was my NUC with a very good Logitech microphone.
External mic.
Yeah, and I probably need to just reboot.
Oh, well, okay, whatever.
I haven't used this machine in days, so I don't know what it's really doing.
Yeah. It may be running some application which is stealing cycles or something. Although it's a fast machine.
It's a very fast machine with 64
Yeah.
gigs.
Hard to believe that something can be running in the background that's eating up the CPU. Although you can bring up the activity thingy.
Yeah, I can definitely tell. There's nothing going on. There's like, 64 gigs of memory. It's only using like 7, I believe. And so I'll double check that again.
You can also test that mic on a different machine to prove that it's the mic or the electronics in the NUC.
It's up to 21 gigs, but I still have 46 gigs available. And the processor is only at 12%.
Yeah. Just test the mic on a different machine.
And I got 12 cores. Oh, well. Anyway, enough of that time wasting stuff. Anybody want to check in?
Yeah, I'll just say I can't be here that long today, but yeah, I think last time I was here was 2 weeks ago. We had this convo with Doug. I thought that was a pretty good one. I enjoyed that,
Thank you, Glenn.
and I listened to it again afterwards as well. So taking some notes and just probably do some follow up at some time, follow up posts. I was curious if you've had any thoughts about the topic afterwards. I listened to some of your meeting last Saturday, but I didn't hear the whole thing. You talked about some of it.
Yeah, well, in the meeting, I definitely was struck by how Doug seemed to take very strongly my some of the things I was saying. And I think in retrospect, there could have been a little bit of let me just say, I didn't put on my kid gloves as well as I typically try to do, because I thought we are so well known to each other and so candid with each other. But I can see how perhaps someone new to the group might feel that this was more kind of a sword fight, done with penises. So I want to at least see if any of that came across to you who have been here for a while.
Fighting over nuances.
Well, I just take a brief look at what I wrote down. I felt that what was really good was the framing of the topic. I felt that we found a really precise framing of the topic that you both sort of coalesced around, which was this of humans co-creating together in the context of the whole planet, with the whole planet in mind. So that, I think that part was very, very clear.
And you did that, Glenn. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that sort of came out at the beginning, but there was definitely some topics that demanded some more clarity. I think there was this notion of attachment, which I felt was very, very central to everything Doug was speaking about, and this notion of degrees of attachment I thought was very important in this discussion, and that was sort of wasn't quite made clear somehow. Yeah, that that was a little bit muddy to me. See what else I written quite a lot of notes actually.
Attachment is the root of suffering, says Buddha.
What?
Attachment is the root of suffering, says Buddha.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like there's degrees of attachment.
Oh, yeah,
Very
sure.
important, because it's like sometimes you talk to somebody who they live inside an idea.
Yeah.
And it's very, very clear, and there's like no way they could possibly go outside of that idea, and it sort of creates a sort of limitation. You get up to a certain point, but then you just can't get any further. But if you have that ability to be in an idea for a little while and then step out of it and into a different framework, and that demands this sort of mental flexibility. And I think this is like very
Strong attachments loosely held.
yeah, that's this big idea, right? It's this, well, strong beliefs loosely held. And I really felt that Doug didn't quite catch that thing, or underestimated it, or it wasn't brought to the light that I feel it deserves, because it's really important. Because if we don't have degrees of attachment, then either we're just going to be completely locked in some prison, or we're going to be the Buddha, and there's nothing in between. And I think that, that's a difficult position to be in. You can't just be locked in a prison with a million doors and no keys, and suddenly step outside of it all and be the Buddha who's beyond every possible attachment and can, play with them as well. So I feel that there's this mental flexibility and sort of an open-mindedness is something that can sort of train you in this ability to move between perspectives. This is really crucial.
Yeah. So keeping the Buddha in mind, the way I use that moment was to ask myself, what is the one thing that I'm attached to? Because none of us can say that we have no attachments.
Free floating and free fall.
Yeah. Well, no, I know exactly. I do have a belief that I'm totally attached to, and it would take a lot of shaking off
Evidence.
to change
A lot of
that.
evidence.
I also.
But you see, even that point that you're aware of that fact, that in itself loosens the attachment a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, but here's the thing. So if I were to tell you what it was, then you could each decide for yourself, can I be attached to that as well? And if I can't, then maybe that's where we have to put up more space between us.
I'll venture to guess.
Go ahead. I love guessing games.
Truth.
Yeah, what's your guess?
Truth.
That's too vague
It's not too vague for me.
for me, but it's my attachment.
Yeah.
Would you like to know what my attachment is?
No, I
Marley,
just-
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
attached to Marley.
We have to know.
I'm attached to the idea. I absolutely believe that awareness to a problem, I'm talking now from an individual point of view. I absolutely believe that something must come into my awareness before, well, not before I can change it, but it will more quickly change if something becomes aware. I'll phrase it like that, because I loosened my attachment to the first way I had it worded.
I mean, something has hold of you, and if you want to change it, you must first become aware of it.
Yes.
Okay, I get that.
Something that I have a little less attachment to, it's a pretty big attachment, but I'm open to having that changed. I tend to believe that as far as doing emotional work, that if you're angry, you have to actually feel that, where I have met other people that believe that could be wiped away through meditation. I don't believe that. I think that's something missing.
Did you say meditation or medication?
Meditation.
Meditation. Okay.
Yes, and that, to me, that's like a spiritual bypass thing. I absolutely think you have to feel it to transform that emotional energy. So I'm pretty strongly attached to that, but I don't know how everybody in the world works.
I actually align with you on that. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, well, that sounds to me like an example of a belief that one could be attached to. But the first example almost sounded like an obvious truth to me, that like if you don't have awareness, like how could you change anything? So I don't know. That to me almost sounds like an obvious truth, but maybe I'm just attached to the same ideas. Yeah.
And awareness of demonstrable evidence. What changes people's minds is unmistakable evidence that overthrows a belief, overthrows a working hypothesis, or no, you're shaking your head no.
No, I think we
Uh-huh.
would like for that to be
That-
true.
I'm
We
sorry,
always
that
say
is
that
not-
most people do not.
you're both talking at once. Say again, Sam.
Yeah.
Sam, I didn't get.
First, can Barry repeat what he said, and then I can understand what Sam is disagreeing to, because I don't know what Barry said.
What I said is that, at least in terms of the scientific paradigm, evidence, demonstrable evidence is what overthrows a working hypothesis. And then Sam shook his head. No.
No. In fact, I strongly agree with that. And in fact, that was one of my prepared notes I wanted to bring into this discussion, is that the thought that we think people understand science and scientific method is overestimated.
Oh, I agree with that. Yeah.
Shocking to me. Shocking, alarmingly shocking to me.
Yeah.
Just few people really understand science and scientific method.
The main source of chagrin in my life. I'm perennially chagrined.
Yeah, there is not.
Sorry, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of seconding that. I just think that experience just clearly demonstrates otherwise, that people do not change their mind as a result of evidence, scientists included.
Yeah, that's true.
Not
I've
change
got
their mind.
examples of that. Yeah.
It just doesn't happen that way.
Cold
That's
fusion
just
was
my
a big
experience.
example.
Well, I would say that scientists are more open to evidence than people who do not understand the scientific method. Now, true, if you've spent 20, 30 years with a direction in your research and something comes up that just blows that out of reality, yeah, that could be emotionally alarming. But I think a true scientist would actually be quite happy with that kind of a result. So to the extent that people are attached to their history, their current beliefs, that's the attachment you're talking about. But
Or attachment to a theory, or attachment to theory, attachment to a way of thinking.
Phlogiston is a classic example. Joseph Priestley, who gets half the credit for discovering oxygen, never bought the oxidation reaction model. He believed in phlogiston to his dying day.
Yep.
What an irony.
Yeah.
Don't you think that a scientist will often be more strongly attached to an idea than most people?
But wait a minute. That does not mean that Priestley did not contribute to science. The fact that, Einstein and Bohr disagreed doesn't mean that Einstein didn't contribute to science.
Yeah.
Obviously he did. So yes, people can be superseded by new events and new information and new theories.
Yeah, I'm a person. I don't know what you said. Rajasthan. He believes in Rajasthan. What did you say?
Phlogiston is an imaginary substance that has a negative mass. It turns out to be the absence of oxygen.
An imaginary substance that has a negative mass was a belief, but it's not a real thing, right?
Right. They thought that a piece of fuel contained something called phlogiston, which is what released the heat when it burned. And when they discovered oxygen, Lavoisier and Joseph Priestley jointly get the credit for discovering that there's a substance called oxygen in the air. And it's the oxygen that combines with the fuel to produce the heat, not the phlogiston that's in the fuel. So the phlogiston turns out to have a negative mass corresponding to the mass of oxygen. It's the missing component of the oxidation reduction reaction, or the oxidation reaction. But Joseph Priestley continued to believe in phlogiston, even though he gets the credit for co-discovering oxygen.
Even right. So he had a word that he used for that reaction of the oxygen creating the fire or the fuel that is, and he called it phlogiston. So even though he knew it was oxygen, he still believed there was a thing called phlogiston. Is that?
And not quite. So for example, what
Okay.
Lavoisier found is if you take the mass of the fuel and then the mass of the ash, including the fumes, it ends up having more mass than the fuel had. And so where did the extra mass come from? It came from the oxygen in the air combining with the fuel. So the resultant products have more mass. What Priestley thought is before they understood oxygen, they thought that everything was in the fuel. So if you start with the fuel, which weighs less, and then you burn the fuel and you get something that's more, then the phlogiston that was in the fuel has to have a negative mass, which is nonsense.
Got it.
But he continued to believe that phlogiston was in the fuel, and that the oxygen in the air was not a factor of the model.
Got it. Didn't mean to sidetrack. I heard the word phlogiston and I never heard that word before. So and then you guys kept talking and I'm like, then I'm going to lose the whole conversation if I don't stop right there. So thank you so much.
It's a classic example of a scientific theory that gets overthrown by new experimental evidence. And so they both worked on this, and Lavoisier is the one who got the model correct, the oxidation model correct. And it just astonishes me that Joseph Priestley didn't buy the oxidation model. He stuck to the old phlogiston model.
Yeah. And you're not going to be able to Google it unless you get it right with a pH. It's
pH, right. I'll put it in the chat, or did you put it in the chat?
I don't know who said it, but somebody said that science progresses funeral by funeral.
Yeah. It was one of the quantum physicists, I forget which one.
But I think this, the point was basically the same, that, most leading scientists are really strongly attached to some or other paradigm or framework or point of view. And, they're not going to change it because of evidence. That's just how it works.
In the late 20th century, the diehard believers in cold fusion were a reprise of the phlogiston story. That they believed that fusion was taking place when it wasn't, and they wouldn't let go of that theory, and they couldn't attend to the evidence to overthrow the incorrect fusion theory.
Another thing that I think this may be more interesting is somebody like Rupert Sheldrake. He wrote a book called Set Science Free, or The Science Delusion. I think it had two titles, one in Britain and one in the USA. But that he had this hypothesis that most of Western science is based on certain assumptions that he questions, but he says that they don't question it. So see if I can remember what the assumptions are. One of the assumptions was that matter is dead, that essentially, there's organic life, it's just us and a few other animals, and the rest of nature is basically just dead matter. There was some other stuff. I have to look at that again, but that was also pretty interesting. I think that a lot of the stuff Doug talks about is in that direction. Feels that, a lot of these intellectuals have kind of painted themselves into a corner.
I think that is a layman's misinterpretation of what we know about mass and matter. The fact is, we hardly know anything about the way energy works and the kinds of forces, and why are there 3 or 4 or 5, right? Or how many dimensions are in string theory. We hardly know any of that. So for anyone, scientist or otherwise, to conclusively say consciousness is this or life is that is just still very premature.
And Sheldrake would agree with you.
Unless you just want to tell stories. You can tell stories around it, but that's not science.
I know, and Sheldrake would have agreed 100% with what you just said, and he would have said that in spite of that fact, that's actually what they believe.
Sheldrake had this concept called morphic resonance. And when I read one of his books about it, I tried to wrap my brain around the idea of what does these two words morphic resonance mean? And I never succeeded in forming a concept of what those two words represented. But he promoted this morphic resonance thing, and one of his partners, I can't remember the guy who co-wrote one of his books, but
It has something to do with memory in nature.
yeah, I don't know. Stacy does have her hand up.
This is the other hand up.
I was caught on morphic resonance, but yeah, my hand was up to say, and it's very obvious, but I still want to say it, that there's a difference between proving something is right or proving something can't be. And I think like just in like discussions, people often want you to prove that, you know, some theory that you believe, prove it. And I think, you know, I want to say, prove to me that it can't be, because until then it's a possibility. And that, so when I look at morphic resonance, and I don't know anything about the man that used the word, but the way it feels to me is that things change in relationship, and those relationships could change. So it's possible that something could be the cause of something under certain conditions, but under other conditions that were never even imagined at the time. You know, let's say at some point we find out that time is not the way we think about it.
It is.
That's going to so that's going to impact the way we've looked at other scientific discoveries. So I don't know if that's has anything to do with morphic resonance, but that's what the words mean to me.
I think that morphic resonance, it is not an easy idea to understand, but it has something to do with memory. That something like that nature itself has a kind of memory. So there's certain reasons why if certain people in that part of the world come upon a certain idea, it increases the likelihood that somebody else will come upon the same idea in a different part of the world. But it's something complex. It's not easy to pin it down.
So I have not studied this notion, but from what I read, you know, there are multiple other possible explanations for that phenomenon. And it doesn't have to be some kind of Akashic memory or field consciousness to explain that. So I think that, you know, to hold it open as a possibility is fine. But for people who believe morphic resonance to say that's the only explanation for the phenomenon is not fine in my view.
Yeah, but Sheldrake doesn't believe that, right? He just presents this perspective of morphic resonance as a way to think about the issue, and he would totally agree that it could be many different things. So it's not a, you know, it's not a very clear idea, right? It's more like a way of thinking about the issue.
So this to me triggers me on another topic, which is, and I know other people who are not here today bring up this notion of sacred geometries. To me, I think, you know, certain geometries have certain behaviors and certain properties, but to me, I've never understood why apply the word sacred to it. Now, I know you've used that term, Glenn, but I know others have as well. So I know that geometry has properties, and the more you study geometry, the more you see those properties. But to me, I'm still curious, why ascribe the word sacred to some of it?
This was for Joshua. He's the expert on this topic.
Well, I'm just a lover of sacred geometry. So the reason it's sacred is if you look at the beginning of life and those 8 little cells that form, and then you look at the beginning of star systems, there's a pattern that forms that is a sacred pattern throughout all sorts of systems in the universe that in ancient times, they felt that that pattern was actually life. That did explain flagella, whatever you're calling it, the oxygen, the binding. They had geometries that explained every single pattern for every aspect of life, all the way down to souls and planets and star systems and things that are sacred, that are off of the planet, that are the gods up in the sky. The movement of the actual planet of Venus moving is sacred geometry. If that makes any sense, Sam. I hope that answers your question of why they called it sacred geometry, not just geometry.
So I hear your explanation, and I still don't understand why the word sacred has to be in there. All of those patterns can exhibit exactly those properties.
So take out the word sacred. Yeah, you don't need the
That's
word
all I'm
sacred
saying.
in anything. Why do they call it sacred songs in a song?
Well, wait
It's
a
just
minute.
song. It's not
Why
sacred.
not just add the word sacred to everything?
Sounds good to me.
Ah.
I think everything is sacred. Sounds great.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that the same as putting in the word bloody instead of sacred?
Well,
No, it's
that's
not
what they
the
said when
same.
they created the Islamic religion. The Muhammad, they asked Muhammad, how long do we have to pray to this God Allah? Like, what do we got to pray to him? Like, how often? Like, what do you want from us? Why are we supposed to honor this Allah God? And he's like, you pray to him all the time, every day, every moment of the day, all the time. And they ended up bargaining that down to 5 times a day. But like you're saying, Stacey, everything should be sacred. If you see the beauty and the geometry and the patterns in everything, then everything is sacred. But if you don't see that and you start studying geometry and you see a bunch of circles and you say, okay, flower of life, zygote, okay, that's in a zygote. Who cares? Like, it's just a pattern. You can make the sacred profane anytime you want. Or you can look at mathematics as something that's sacred, that's beautiful, that creates living systems inside of mathematics that is so profound and so sacred, not in the geometry of it, but the actual numbering system of specific mathematical patterns. That's just mind-boggling. I'll leave it at that. Why it's called sacred, I think it's because it explains the very underlying patterns of the entire universe from as above, so below. But that's for me. I would love to share that, the little that I know, Sam. I'd be happy to share it with you.
I agree with that last statement. I believe that the mathematical expressions of these things really do draw out and point to the beauties, the symmetries, the asymmetries, the dynamics of the universe. And to the extent that one wants to align with that, that is sacred, that is illuminating, that is profound, that is spiritual. And yet, I still don't know what the word sacred means.
I'll give you an example of one that a mathematician might consider sacred. Go back to Leonard Euler and Erwin Schrödinger. Take the expression E, the exponential E raised to the I omega t, where I is the imaginary unit. And that's so powerful that is considered sacred and also beautiful. And so anything that's periodic, and lots of stuff in our culture is periodic, sinusoidal. And so e to the I omega t is the core term in the mathematical model of anything that's periodic. And so Euler found it as a beautiful relationship. He introduced it, and then Schrödinger just, adopted it wholesale in the wave function.
Barry,
And-
what does it mean if something's periodic? I don't know.
It's like
It's
a
like-
drum beat.
It's
Repeat
like a drum beat. It repeats.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Bum, ba bum, ba bum, ba
Got
bum,
it.
like a
Okay.
heartbeat. And your heartbeat, which is bloody sacred, it's
Okay.
not exactly sinusoidal because it's got jitter to it on purpose, but
So that's basically saying that there's a synergistic effect with the imagination?
well, I mean, your heart beats, your breathing is regular, anything that's regular, first of all, it's
Right.
predictable because it's regular, but
Right.
also living systems have a regular beat to them. The
What's
heartbeat.
the I? But what's the I? So like my heart's beating at a certain frequency, whatever.
All right.
And then the I happens, right? I mean, I'm trying to
Well,
understand.
When you're using the
I?
word I, in what context? Because
You used the word I, you said
the
E.
word I that I use is the unit of the imaginary number in mathematics.
Yeah. Or
It's
I
not-
Oh,
it's not the
imaginary
pronoun I.
number.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I-
so you have real numbers and imaginary numbers. I stands for the imaginary unit. Like one
I
stands
heard
for the real-
imaginary. I heard imaginary. I thought you meant imagination. I'm trying to
No,
like
no.
figure this
And-
out in my head. Got it.
And for most people, when you talk about complex and imaginary numbers, your average layperson who hasn't studied enough math doesn't really know what you're talking about. You know, it's just, I mean, they used to call negative numbers fictional numbers till they finally decided, oh, they're just, you know, it's just that. Like
the
yeah,
natural numbers.
That's sort of, now we're getting a little into the weeds. Sacred geometry is a very big field. I'm not an expert on it, but I know that some of those patterns are incredibly beautiful and make an impression on me. I would certainly say that it has a
think those
synergy with
patterns-
imagination, but
Those
it's also
patterns clearly exist. Those patterns
but-
are clearly wondrous. They certainly transform from one to another. They clearly illustrate dynamism. They clearly indicate flow. They clearly
Hmm.
indicate relationship. But what makes it sacred?
Well, one of the reasons is if it turns out to be true that every possible constellation of matter is essentially based on that geometry. That would be an example. I don't
Yeah,
know
I
if
mean, I would say that these phenomena, like the cyclical behavior expressed in omega I, as a power of E, or e to the minus pi I equals whatever, that's another very beautiful equation.
right.
So
and
I think that mathematics is revealing much about the universe. And the
Right.
more you see what math is telling you, like why do Riemann, roots lie on a straight line, for example, then you can wonder about these things. But what the bleep makes it sacred is my question.
Just
I
that's
just
beautiful.
answered.
Just makes your heart go pitter pat.
I just gave an answer.
Here.
It
well-
would be safe if it turns out to be true that this is a geometry that is the basis of every single system in the universe. If
That's
that
a given. That's a given to me.
Josh had something to add.
I was just gonna the concept of Gaia, of a living creature of the earth, and the concept of worshiping the earth as sacred, as the sacred entity of being a living organism that spreads these tectonic plates. It's one giant organism. Is that a sacred thing? If I said the sacred earth or Gaia, would you think, why are you calling earth sacred? Like,
No, I'm willing to use the word. I just don't know what the definition is. And I don't know what it contains in that definition that's not contained in other words that I'm already familiar with. Like
I think
connection.
it's the, I'm sorry. I think it's the emphasis. It's just the
On what?
emphasis
On what?
on
what?
the fact that it could be the key to the mystery of life.
Exactly.
But it's more than that. It's more than that, okay? It's more than that. It's the fact that this is a structure, which is the hexagonic structure. And you
why don't
can
we
see
pull
it
up
in
an
all
actual
parts.
picture of it? Why don't you pull up the Visa Pisces and look at the mathematics behind that shape of the Visa Pisces that is light itself, that is the mathematics of light. I mean, if you look at, study the mathematics of the Visa Pisces,
What's
and
this word?
why Visa Pisces, I'd have to,
I don't know this word.
Spell it, I'll type it in.
You're
just
not talking
type in
about the
sacred geometry
constellation.
Visa
and a
Pisces.
credit
No,
card.
I'm not, no. I'm probably
I'll-
pronouncing the Latin incorrectly. It's Visa, but if you
I'll
type in
find it.
sacred geometry Visa Pisces, sorry, I got the baby, I can't type right now,
I'm just
but
trying
it'll
to
pop
find a
up. It's the two
picture.
circles, and it's actually, it's where the Jesus fish comes from. It's where I think a lot of the sacred understandings come from the actual mathematics.
Look, I don't dispute that there are patterns in geometry that are reflected in coral shells, fish, eye patterns, brain
No, it's more,
patterns.
it's deeper than that. It's
skeleton.
so much deeper than that, Sam. It's way deeper.
Yeah, I think you're not getting it, Sam. It's deeper. It's it go. I don't know if it's true, but that's the idea, that it's a fundamental pattern.
What is a fundamental pattern?
It's hexagonic.
Wait, just
Hexagons are hexagons. What makes them
put up a
fundamental?
visual. You can talk all day, but if you show the
I know
zygote
what
of an
I'm
hexagons
egg,
look
trying
like.
to
I know
find
what
a
triangles
goddamn
look like.
visual, but
I know
all
what
I'm seeing is
I'll
hexagons
find
ads.
look
it.
like.
Blah, 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 blah.
I'm trying to find it, and all I'm finding is these damn ads. So we have to find the visual. It's just somebody's trying to sell stuff. So
Well-
instead of just being able to find the picture,
So
Well-
while you're,
it's
Well,
a
you're looking-
hexagon. It's 6 lines, right? And that is snowflakes. You've seen snow crystals.
Right.
It's that
Snowflakes.
structure. It's the
They're
same
beautiful.
structure as snow crystals. It's the same structure as these B cubes things. It's and it's a fractal, and
Yes.
you get the structure also by circles. So if you take 7 perfect circles, then you get a unit. I'm sure you must have seen this.
Of course, I've seen them. I've seen those shapes. I'm still trying to figure out why they're sacred. Why is that word
Sacred,
meaning?
if it is the case that this is a fundamental pattern
And it
that
is.
underlies
I
every
grant that.
possible pattern. If it underlies every possible pattern, and if every possible pattern arises out of it, I think that's one of the reasons why it's considered sacred. It's
Well,
like,
triangles are even more fundamental, you know?
No,
Points are
but-
even more fundamental.
but Sam, no, this is made of triangles. So this is the
That's
triangle.
right. So triangles are more
And-
fundamental, right?
No, it's not. It's the same thing. This is the triangle. This is the circle. Okay? This is the same pattern. It's exactly the same pattern.
Okay, so I'm observing that if I ask questions, people seem to get more and more emotionally heated. Why is that?
It's just that you're not understanding what I'm saying.
I don't. So I'm leaning in. I'm actually trying to understand. And yet I'm getting strong reaction.
No,
Well,
it's
one of
because
the
it's,
reasons is I can't find the picture. That's one of the reasons. Sorry,
I just
speak.
put a 12-minute video that'll explain the whole thing, or we can argue for 24 minutes. Or if you wanted to watch it, I'd be happy to answer any question after that 12-minute video. It'll explain it.
Okay, Josh,
'Cause
I'll watch it.
I feel your sincerity. Yeah.
Here, I found. Look, you see here? This is an example.
Okay, so those
This
are
is
triangles.
triangles.
Those are
Yes.
hexagons. It's also a lattice. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. And now look at this.
Right. Those are circles,
That's-
those are triangles, those could be hexagons. I agree.
Yes. And that's the same pattern. You see what I mean? It's the same geometry.
I can see that one maps to the other, yes.
And it's 6 directions outwards.
Okay. All right,
And so here's another example.
yes.
So you can basically see that there's a lot of versions of this, right? That you can, and you can build all kinds of creative stuff out of it. This is a drawing I made some years ago, and there's just a beauty to it. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's true that this is the fundamental pattern of all patterns. But if it is, and that's what I've heard many people say, that, at least for me, makes it meaningful why you would consider it sacred. If it is the pattern of all patterns.
I think Barry has something to say.
Yeah, I want to go back to Sam's questions. What does the word sacred mean? It's really a poetic term. Poets would use a term, or maybe theologians would use a term like sacred. But what it means to me is something is self-renewal and therefore everlasting. And so we think of the sacredness of life, it's self-renewing and in some theological sense, everlasting. And the simplest example of something that's self-renewing and everlasting is a photon, because a photon has an oscillating electric field and an oscillating magnetic field that reinforce each other, recreate each other. And the only way they can do this, according to Maxwell, is they have to be traveling at the speed of light. And you get these sinusoidal perturbations in electric and magnetic fields, which are self-renewing, therefore everlasting, and also in motion. And
Right.
in a sense, that's the physics of everlasting. And in a
Okay.
sense, that's sacred, because without photons, there wouldn't be any life.
Okay.
That's
So
a good
are
explain.
photons alive?
What you say?
Are photons alive?
Well, that's a very good question, because it begs the question of what do we mean by self-renewing and everlasting?
Exactly.
And you know, Stacy will chuckle at the dialogue between me and Larry Eli between what do we mean by the word life. For him, it's sort of basically it's a conscious human being, and nothing else really fits his definition. But we talk about artificial life, and the question is, will people consider artificial life that is not carbon-based, you know, neurons and cells,
Right.
cellular life? And people are going to have to come to grips with self-renewing automata, self-replicating automata, which are conscious in the sense that they can process information and adopt goals and, you know, and engage in complex behaviors. And eventually we're going to have to come to this question is, what do we mean by life? And even now, people say, well, a bacteria is alive, but a virus isn't. I mean, they really come to these edge cases. And the next edge case is synthetic self-reproducing automata, which we already have. So yeah, the question is, what do we mean by this?
3D printers alive, for example.
I have to read the text because I missed the key word.
3D print-
Are 3D printers alive?
3D printers alive. 3D printers.
Hmm.
Well, I'm much more liberal about what I consider life than, say, Larry Eli, who basically says it has to be an intelligent mammal who's fully functional and their brain is working.
It's a
Because I'll
question.
ask him a question,
Question.
you know, if somebody's unconscious or in a coma, you know, it doesn't fit his definition. His definition is basically chauvinistic. And I'm much more liberal. You know, Sherry Turkle wrote a book, something, I think back in the 90s, where she asks kindergartners, you know, whether they considered their computer alive, and more than half of them considered their computer to be alive in the sense that they understood what the word meant. You know, so anything that's functionally operating and sort of self-perpetuating, self-renewing, self-repairing, you know, that metaphorically meets the definition. So if you try to get a precise dictionary definition, you can't. It's really metaphorical.
Yeah,
And
and
sacred's the same way. It's a metaphor. It's a poetic term.
another word for sacred is holy, and the word holy also implies wholesome.
Yeah.
So it's something that relates to the whole.
The system.
Yeah, but not just one system, but one system, all other systems, and the totality of all possible systems. So I think that if it's, that's just my definition, but if I would call something sacred or holy, then I would say it's something that has to do with absolutely everything that exists and could exist.
Sam wanted to say something?
So I'm curious about the phenomenon of, let's call knowledge the stuff that we think we believe, okay? And then there's the universe, which is a bunch of stuff that we don't yet understand. So we believe and understand a small part of it. And there's a big part that we do not understand. There's an emotional relationship, it feels like, between we as individuals and as a species or as a community with the stuff that we don't understand. We seem to want to give explanations to it. And the explanations we give to it need to, of course, only come from constructs that we already do understand, right? Otherwise, there's just nothing there, okay? So when we apply the axiomatic constructs that we do understand and say, oh, let's apply these words to this stuff that we do not understand, then obviously it's only an approximation. Now, to me, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with approximations because you lean into it, you peer deeply into it, you shine a light into it, you take signals out of it, whatever, okay? You can actually then say, oh, then there are these new relationships that I can ponder about and poke at and understand more. But the application of a word to that unknown, whether it's holy, whether it's God, whether it's sacred, whether it's whatever, source, whatever, is only a placeholder, it seems to me. Now, if you begin to ascribe properties to this placeholder without foundation, like omnipotence, omniscience, loving, benevolent, looking out for me, all these things, that's an emotional need that we're expressing. There's nothing in reality that says that's true, other than your
Of
need
course,
to believe it.
obviously, everything you're saying is totally obvious.
Yeah, other than your need to believe that it's true. And yet, people will use it to apply to systems of governance, systems of community, systems of family, systems of law. And that's where I think we have failed as reasoning creatures to push back against that BS. Now, I realize that I'm poking a lot of people right now, but I'm leaning into this chasm between what we understand and what we do not understand. And what we do not understand, I'm very open to. And that's why I say, if you're using the word holy or sacred or God or whatever, okay, then I want to lean
And
into
then everything you just said is obviously implied in using
it's
that.
not obvious.
Right?
Because a lot of
Yes.
people put a lot of meaning behind those words and will then dictate behavior to others or dictate systems of governance or community or behavior.
Look, everything you just said, I probably heard you say this exact thing more than 100 times. And I probably heard other people say exactly the same thing. I mean, I have it's countless times I've heard people say this exact thing that you just said.
Yeah.
And
yet,
it's totally obvious.
No, it's not obvious at all to most people. It is not at all obvious.
But the question is,
It may be obvious to you. It may be obvious to me, but it's not obvious to most.
well, it's obvious to a lot of people. But the question is it possible to do it? So what I'm saying is it possible? Is it physically possible for a person to actually have that openness? Some people claim it's not. And that's where this with the Greece comes in again. It's actually really important because everything you just said, you've said it hundreds of times. I've said it hundreds of times. Probably every person here has said this exact thing so many times that I can't even believe it. Ah, come on, man. It's so classical. It's like you're taking the unknown and you're projecting the known into the unknown. It's like the most classical.
That's not the only thing that was said, Glenn. That's not the only thing that was said.
Well, but
don't.
the foundation of it. That's the foundation of it. And that's the foundation of dogma. It's the foundation of believing things without evidence. It's the foundation of projecting power and control over others. It's the foundation of all of this stuff, right? So what you just said is what every sage, every religious founder said. It's what every scientist has said. It's what every philosopher has said. It's what every common sense person has said. You know, as a principle, it's totally obvious. If I assume, based on what little I know, that the unknown is represented by the little I know, that's irrational. But still, for some reason or other, humans seem to be doing it, even when we know it's irrational. So it's like, how do we get out of it then?
I'd like to ask the others. That's Glenn, that's Barry, that's Stacy, that's Josh, that's Kayla. whether or not you've actually heard these things and whether they're obvious. Because I have not heard that it's this obvious as the man believes. I would like to believe it is true. And maybe it is true, and I just have been hanging around with the wrong people. But is this obvious? Have you heard this hundreds of times before? Very.
Marvin Minsky coined the expression suitcase words. And another definition of suitcase words is the name of a fuzzy set. Fuzzy set is a collection of things which you don't have a crisp boundary for whether something is in the set or out of the set. And poetic metaphors are full of suitcase words, words that define fuzzy sets with very vague boundaries. And if you try to put a crisp boundary around a word that's a suitcase word or a vague word, poetic metaphor, you can't, because they're fuzzy sets and they have a very fuzzy boundary, and people will have a probability that something belongs to it or doesn't belong to it. And we just have to live with the fact that our language is full of these vague suitcase words that are fuzzy sets, and people will disagree on whether something belongs to that suitcase or not. Okay, fine. But you're not doing hard, crisp logic. You're doing poetry. Okay, poetry, it's part of our culture.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
And I would go further one step, right? In the realm of poetry, I completely accept, and I completely agree with what you just said. I got no issue with that. But when you want to apply those concepts to interpersonal behavior and start creating protocols and laws and even penalties around them,
Oh, yeah.
then it's probably inappropriate. And yet, they're everywhere. This word God even appears, in courtrooms.
But that's a typical
And I've
concept, right?
seen it.
That's
It's a
like
what?
that's the archetypical fuzzy concept. That's like the mother of all. What do you call them, Barry? What's it?
Suitcase words?
Suitcase
Suitcase
words.
Yeah,
suitcase?
it's obvious. If you ascribe a specific meaning to the word God, you miss the entire point. It's like, obviously you can't describe a specific meaning to that word. That's the whole point with the word.
If you go back to the way the word appears in the ancient languages, like Allah, words like that, it literally means most high. So most high is a suitcase. What's most high to Sam is maybe not most high to Stacy, but most high is sort of a vague metaphorical, the thing that's most important to me, to you, to world, to survival,
And it points to
it's
the
a,
unknown.
it's a word that names a fuzzy set. Most high.
Josh?
Yeah, the baby just went to sleep, so I'm going to talk softly. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
The idea of all of science is to create a model, and the idea in all of religion is to create a model, and the idea of all of reality is to create a model and then communicate that to other beings, other things. So in the end, it's all models.
Mental models.
And constructs of, like, I love Yuval Harari's work of Sapiens, Homo Deus, and 21 Problems for the 21st Century, past, present, and future. And those three constructs of time, past, present, and future, those are models as well. And that's where it gets really profane or sacred, whichever way you want to take it, is time itself is a model. It's not necessarily a reality, but we all agree, and thus it becomes a construct and a model that we agree to use, but no one can prove that time is real. You can say relative to this, this happens to this. These are differential equations, but to the whole construct of the universe, no one can prove it started 4.3 billion. That's just a construct. It's a model that we've created. So I think when we get into the model creation and arguing over models, some models feel good to other people. And for me, sacred geometry is a model that feels really good to me to explain a lot of the mathematics in both science and physics and theology and biology and life science and astronomy. It works for me, but I don't expect anyone, you could have the spaghetti monster model, and if that works for you, awesome. I thank you for letting me speak for a sec.
Yeah. Something you'd be lost without it. It's sacred if you would be lost without it.
Well, I just want to agree with what Josh was saying, because I've been thinking a lot about this, trying to figure out how many models there might actually be, because I do think that there are supposed to be, I do think there is more than one model that actually works for the group it was meant for. And that if they followed that model and the other coexisting models, those people followed those models, that we might have the harmony. So for me, especially these past few years, it's been about locating the energy that my model would work best within. So, there are certain people that I follow, and then I look to see who influenced them, and I might look and see what they learned from those people. And usually a lot of it fits, some of it doesn't. So again, I'm creating my own model as I go that's uniquely designed for me. But part of being able to do that is really knowing on a deep level who I am, meaning who I came in here as, not who traumatic events and life caused me to become. That's the unbecoming that Barry talks about. So I think that you need to unbecome first to be able to find the right model and live within it. But
Becoming is the name of the deity of Moses.
Sam?
So I don't find the word model triggering at all. I think that the fact that we have lots of people in the room, people represented by these moving pictures that I see, I can say my model is each of those pictures is associated with a human being. Inside that human being is a brain. Inside that brain is one or more mental models. Or if you want to use the word mind, use the word mind. So in talking in a mathematical way, I talk about mathematical terms in mathematical models. In speaking about poetry, I can use poetic terms like reflections and self-reflections and projections, etc. In talking in biological terms, I can use those, and those are all different models. To the extent that I understand the interdisciplinary ideas behind them, I can have aggregate models that actually combine physics and biology. I could actually have mathematics and reflections of the moon combined in a different model. The art of thinking, I think, is to keep multiple models at play and to find out which models are actually giving you insights and which are actually just not the most useful at the time. And then to relate them in such a way to the other models you've got, bounce them off, see if it gives you a different sense of what that model is trying to tell you. And the other aspect of it is to try to communicate that to others so that maybe that's useful to others. So I have no difficulty with multiple. In fact, multiple models and trying to fit them together is how one explores, playing with your mental blocks. That's exactly the phrase. Okay? So I got no issue with that. The issue is, as some people say, trying to confuse the model with reality. I don't think, true thinkers actually ever get close to that. Reality is a combination of lots of different kinds of models at play, and you're just trying to figure out which ones fit and how you can grow them.
Right. So each model is a limitation of reality that supersedes it. It's just, I have to go soon, but there's a point that I didn't want to miss. And I think it ties in with this, and I think it ties in with what Doug's been talking about as well. Because there's a lot of people who say what you just said, Sam. It's like, I've heard it so many times. It's almost incredible. And at the same time, it seems to be very hard to do. It's easy to understand as a principle that every single model is limited and it doesn't represent all of reality. It's not the only solution. It's easy to understand as a principle. But for some reason or other, it seems to be the case that in actual fact, these models are sticky somehow. We get attached to them very, very easily, including very, very smart people and people who, you know, in principle, are against all attachment to models. And yet, in actuality, that's what seems to happen again and again and again. So, and I think that this was one of the things that Rupert Sheldrake was saying. He was saying that, I'm not talking about morphic resonance, I don't really understand that, but this talk about science, his point was, in science, there's, you know, all these beautiful ideas about the scientific method, which we've talked about many times. But he had the observation that there was certain dogmas, which in actuality, if you look at the behavior of scientists, you can understand that they seem to believe that. Like they seem to believe that matter is unconscious, for example. They don't seem to believe that maybe they're conscious, maybe they're not conscious, but they seem to actually believe they're unconscious. Just like they seem to actually believe that nature is purposeless. Instead of saying maybe there's a purpose, maybe not. And I just found this. He said, according to the dogmas of science, all reality is made of material. So that's another assumption. If you ask the clever guys, they'll say, we don't even know what material is. This is very unknown, etc. They'll say all these true things, right? That's what Sheldrake's point. Sheldrake's point is, if you look at the behavior of these people, if you look at the choices that are made of what topics to research, where the money goes, what people are being included in the club, what people are being excluded from the clubs, and so on and so on. There seems to be a dogma. All of nature is built of material, that mind emerges from material and not the reverse, that material is essentially dead, that nature is a machine. That's all, that the machine metaphor is very present, that consciousness is nothing but the physical activity of the brain, and that free will is just an illusion. So that was examples of beliefs which, in Sheldrake's observation, you know, most of our Western culture, most of our intellectual culture actually believes this. So it's not that they say maybe it's like this, maybe it's not like this, maybe all of nature is essentially consciousness, maybe all of nature is essentially matter, maybe matter and consciousness is essentially the same thing, but it's an actual belief that are these dogmas. So that was his point. Yeah, I think it's important to just recognize it's a difference between saying you believe in something and actually believing it, and you can sort of see it from your behavior.
Okay. Can I try?
I hope that was clear. Hope that was clear.
Let me see if I understood that, okay? Because I think, to me, what you say, I can't really disagree with, but I can actually see that, in my view, we should minimize the surprise at it. In other words, there's an implied Occam's razor at play here. And if I'm going to go to a scientist and say, is matter conscious? Probably, if I ask this of Barry, he's going to say, define consciousness. In the absence of that definition, he's going to say, I don't know, or better yet, go away. That's probably what they're going to say. So I think that if we do not have a notion of consciousness that is clear, that's testable, and by testable, I can say, I can point at something, apply the conditions of consciousness according to the definition, and come up with a yes or no. I should be able to say, is this conscious? And I should be able to say yes or no, right? Without that clarity of definition of testability, you're going to say, it's a meaningless word. So I'm probably of the opinion that most scientists will say, I'm not going to waste my time on things which are not testable, not pursuable, with reasonable effort, with reasonable attention and time and focus and imagination. So, same thing with God. If it's not definable in such a way that it's testable and executable, and I can say, is this God? And come up with a yes or no, then it's not worth
What?
pursuing. There's another
But
useless.
here we're at the core of it, right? Here we're at the core of it. This is what Doug's pointing to. Mistaking the unknown for the non-existence, mistaking the undefinable for the non-existence. I think this is at the heart of what we're getting at.
Wait,
Oh,
I wasn't finished. I wasn't finished. Okay.
I know, but this
I'm
is a
not
crucial.
I'm not saying that you can't define it. I'm not saying that you can't put it in such a way that it's experimentally pursuable. I'm not. It certainly can be. But what I'm saying is I disagree with the people who are not even open to those possibilities, who say, I know what God is, and I will tell you what God is. You don't need to go experiment because I could already tell you. Those are the opinions and positions which I find not worthy of attention.
But we agree on that.
Pursuit.
Yeah, but we agree on that. But that's not the point here. The point here is that if something is undefinable, do we then treat it as non-existent?
Nothing is undefinable.
But if it's in practice, very difficult to define. Okay, you get my point. Don't deliberately misunderstand me.
No.
Just gave examples. You gave examples. No, it may be not in principle, but you gave examples of things that in practice are very difficult to define and very difficult to measure. And the observation is that this culture of all these intellectuals, if they can't measure it, if they can't define it, they pretend as if it doesn't exist. And that's irrational. That's irrational.
Can we let
And
Barry jump in and stop the ping pong for a minute?
Instead of the word God, take another phrase, the process of creation. Now, scientists do study the process of creation in the cosmos. Suppose you go into an artist studio and you want to watch an artist engage in the process of creating a novel, original work of art. And you're studying the process of creativity in this context. And so you're there for a couple of days and an artist creates a work of art. And you say, that's a beautiful creative work. And somebody else comes along and says, no, it's derivative. It's just a copy of this other obscure artist's work. He just copied somebody else's. Well, this notion of copying something that already exists, that's repeating an existing pattern, morphic resonance. And so it's very hard. It's one thing to say, there's this thing called creativity or the process of creation. But then how do you know if an instance really is original or simply derivative? You can't, it's one of these vague words. So process of creation is a very interesting notion to study, but it's also vague. Because how do you know whether an example really is novel, original, first time ever, or simply the third, fourth, or nth time of the same structure? How would you know?
So easy to know. But I was wondering, was this to me, this just seems so crucial because this is where the intellectuals get lost in their ideas. I think is this tendency that if you can't easily define it or measure it, you treat it as if it's non-existent. I think that is right at the heart of what Doug is saying is a fundamental flaw in our approach to reality.
To me, the fundamental flaw is believing exactly that statement. I think that it's exactly wrong because what we are doing, let's say, for example, with the James Webb Space Telescope, is we are expending huge effort to explore something that is extremely hard to observe. And yet we are positing in it a crucial matter of importance to existence and our existentiality. So it is possible to lean into matters that are very, very difficult to study. And I would say consciousness is one of them. I would say life is one of them. And you know, the origin of the galaxy, of the universe is one of them. And we are leaning into those questions. And to attempt to define them, albeit incorrectly, are still valuable attempts to do so. So there is no implication that science is shying away from these difficult questions. No, indeed. In fact, it's politicians who are not giving scientists the assets and resources to actually adequately lean into these questions. And only overseas, like at CERN, can you find the billions required to actually create, you know, these accelerators that need to be done at scale. So we are, as a species, in possession of true scientists who do want to pursue the truth and see what God is telling us, if there is a God.
Again, I feel you're talking about something different. I can give an example.
No, I'm talking crucially about the crucial point here. Now, let me just finish with one more analogy, okay? Imagine two piles of people, okay? One pile of people over here on my right, one pile of people over here on my left. One pile of people over here who believe in, let's say, the historical stories, that God is this and Moses is that, and you know, the bush is this and everything else, all about that, okay? Now over here are another group of people who grew up in the same culture, okay? But over here in this culture, there's one or two or three or small number of people who say, we can actually ask God what God created. Replace God with the universe if you like, okay? But over here, you can't do this. Over here, you can. And yet, it's still 99% populated by people who are in the practice of the same culture as these people over here on the right. The difference is on the left, there's a few representative people who know how to ask the right questions and look for the right answers. Those are the gems that we need to not lose. Those are the gems that we need to keep and nurture and foster and grow more of. That's the true difference. It's not like over here you have scientists, all of whom 100% really understand the scientific process. No, they're also subject to political pressures, funding sources, you know, whether or not they're a professor or advisor, you know, likes their thesis topic, whether or not the magazine wants their publication, whether or not their peers like them, whether or not they can get the money for their experiments. All of those pressures still exist. It's all part of being human. And yet there's still those handful who believe in the right way to ask the right questions and the right way to listen to the right answers. That's the difference.
I know that
That's
they're, but I don't think we're talking about them. I think we're talking about general, normal, intellectual Western culture and the tendency to mistake the non-existent for the undefinable. I have a great example. When I go into a web page, there comes up a pop-up. It asks me, do I want to allow cookies? And it's some kind of legislator who came up with this idea that all these websites are going to ask that question. Here's my question. Do they measure what time and attention is lost? No, they don't. They don't measure it. So therefore, they're making this decision of putting up millions, billions of these pop-ups, wasting enormous amounts of human time and attention, but it's not taken into account because it's not being measured.
How does
That's
that
example.
factor into a
I
conversation?
actually followed that, but it was kind of vague, just so you know, but I know where you're going because that was something that Elon Musk talked about. And it's also
Yes.
something that I worked on GDPR and helped everyone do all that stuff. So what you're saying is, do you mind if I rephrase that so it's not so vague?
Yeah, please.
When creating legislation or creating a rule or creating any kind of science, do people calculate what the effect is afterwards? Is that what you're saying? Is they didn't take into account for the amount of time that's wasted? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and because that's practically speaking, it's difficult to measure it.
I'd like to bring up
Yeah.
something big that I just learned this week that I feel so ignorant that I didn't know. Is in the United States government, there's this rule called the comment period. And I think Sam talks about all the time requests for comments. And I didn't know, because I'm ignorant, that every single law from every agency and all of the government is posted every day on a government website in a legislation legal framework of a journal that's public for everyone to see. And at any point in time, anyone can hold, for each one of these rules, they have a comment period of 30 to 60 days. And if it's more complicated, it's 180 days, where everyone in our democracy has the right to hold a town hall and comment on that rule before that rule goes into the actual committees that turn them into laws. And I didn't know that this existed of a comment period. I didn't even know that they wrote down all the rules. I didn't, I'm not in government. I don't know. I wasn't taught this in school, but I think that idea of allowing people to participate in rules, in science, in legislation is something that needs to get out to the public, because people don't even know they're allowed to participate. Just like when you post something, Sam, on this document, we are all allowed to comment on it, but then it's just like the government. It gets lost in some folder in a file in Facebook somewhere where the thing is there. It's not every time we pop up on Zoom, there's a big button that says Sam's comment thing. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's there. I could ask you for it anytime. You could look it back up, but that's the real thing I'd like to bring up, is when we talk about science or models or rules or laws, is how interoperable do we make it, including our discussions that we have hundreds of times over the same things. I've said models about 30 times here at GCC, but how often do we stop? The only reason I learned about comment period is some lady in Spain who was educated for 2 years in America mentioned it, and it would have went right past the conversation, but I stopped her and said, wait, did you just say comment period? What's a comment period? And she went, oh, I'll send you a link and show you what I'm talking about. But it would have just went right by. And I think that's the biggest problem we have, is there's so much information that flies right by us. Like I said, sacred geometry. Oh, what the hell is sacred geometry? Oh, well, a circle of life, flower of life. Oh, like I've seen that. Oh, pi 1.618. Oh, what is that? The golden ratio? Oh, what is it? Oh, it's in pine cones. It's in the spiral of the galaxy. It's so much more than that. There's like 8 hours of information that's just scratching the surface. And when Glenn showed that pattern of those triangles, he didn't even explain what that pattern is. That's called the Noah pattern. It's very sacred in Japanese culture. That pattern itself of the exact, if you think about geometry, it can be off 1 degree and it's a different pattern. When he's making that triangle, 1 degree different creates a different weave or a different pattern. And that's different in African cultures. But sacred geometry is the thing that weaves through every culture on every planet, from Persia to Africa to India to America to Alaska to Greenland. It is a pattern that weaves through all of these patterns. But I'm ranting now, so I digress. I just wanted to say that things just fly over our heads. Like Elon Musk made a flippant comment on a podcast like, cookies. That's the stupidest thing. You know how many thousands of hours everyone's wasting clicking that? And if you add it all up, it's thousands of hours of wasted time every time you go to a website. But is that relevant is my question.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there.
That's another red herring. Because if you stand, for 5 seconds in front of a gas pump, looking for your credit card, there's how many thousands or billions of hours wasted there. If you actually look through a Dewey Decimal Card catalog, for 30 minutes trying to find your book, how many billions of hours were lost throughout all of educational history there? I think that's just a trivial case trying to make.
Seriously? Seriously? Are you kidding?
Yes.
Trivial case. We're putting a mechanism in place that systematically wastes people's time, and that's a different thing than people wasting their time because of other reasons. If you put
Look, we wasted time standing in line to pay for things at the grocery store, and we seem to accept that. We waste time looking at commercials on TV, and we seem to accept that. This is a fraction of those wasted times. We're trying to get, emotional about something that is just common today, just simply because Elon Musk said it.
But there's a point here. I feel you're not getting it. It's not measurable, right? So easily.
None
So
of these things are measurable, and yet we can estimate them.
we can, but we don't. And that's
Yes, we do.
well,
It's possible.
it's possible, but it isn't being done. That's the problem.
No, how do you know it's not being done? What is the point here? The point is you're trying to take something that Elon said and you're trying to make it profound. I don't
No,
think
it's
it's that
not.
profound.
It's not what he said. This is my personal experience. When I interact with computers, they waste so much of my time by design. If those people who designed that had really taken a sound evaluation of the value of human attention, then that would have been put into the design and it couldn't work like this. But the point I'm getting to is, but this is crucial, the point I'm getting to is it's not easily measurable. And that's why I think that this happens. And it has something to do with what Josh said too about limited time and energy. But it's certain things are difficult to measure. Since they're difficult to measure, we treat them as if they're not important. And I think that's something that is very crucial to Doug's point. But it doesn't get understood. Yeah.
Okay, I know I'm pissing a lot of people off, okay? But let me just say one last thing and maybe I'll just shut up then, okay? For at least 20 or 30 years, every time you've installed a piece of software, you've had to accept the terms and conditions, right? Every time you sign up at a website, you have to, acknowledge the privacy and you have to accept the terms and conditions and the licensing terms, right? So that's been true for 20, going on 25, maybe 30 years. And even more if you actually bought retail software that you installed on your own machine. And yet, nobody ever, said, oh, this is a waste of time. It wasn't until Elon, according to you, said this, that now all of a sudden we're saying, now this is just a big waste of time.
No. I had thought about this and fucking sweared at the computer lots of times way before I heard Elon say this. And I'm not the only one, I guarantee you. There's so many of these bullshit pop-ups that come up.
All right.
And it's enormous amounts of human time wasted.
If you don't believe that, then you're actually saying you don't believe in the capitalist right to protect intellectual property and to acknowledge that you have limited intellectual property on that software. Or do you believe? And
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in this equation, that property right is given emphasis, while the emphasis on the lost time and attention and energy, that is not given emphasis. It's being practically ignored. And one of the reasons it's being ignored is because you can't easily measure it. you can't easily pinpoint it. You kind of have to reason your way to.
Okay.
You
I'm
can't
gonna
put
do
a
you all
number
a
on
favor
it.
and shut up now. Okay, I'm gonna do you all a favor and shut up now.
My turn to go. Given the propensity of politicians to submit to the pressure coming from lobbyists and the the incentive coming from lobbyists, deep pockets, there's a propensity for these politicians not to do the will of the people, to do the will of the lobbyists. And so this is an issue that needs risk assessment. If you put risk assessment into the way politicians make decisions, we might get a better picture of the mess that's in there. It's a mess. It's a total swamp of corrupt and vile human beings who just lie to your face. Even if they think they're trying to be honest, sometimes they've been convinced by the lobbyists that it's a fact. So they'll tell you lies to your face. Like, we've got plenty of resources available and the world's not in crisis. Global warming's a myth. And the oil pipelines can continue across anyone's land, even if it's not your land. And teaching history shouldn't be punished. People who teach American history shouldn't be punished for it. It's not a crime to teach unless the politicians are influenced so corruptly by the lobbyists that they don't want the truth of the American history taught. And they start banning books. So, you know, I don't pretend to know much about the Boston Tea Party or anything that went on in those days, but these capitalists who designed the system did a pretty good job of making sure that nothing would get in their way, even a democracy. Over.
Yeah. I have to check out now, but we never got to check-ins. And in the very beginning, I put a link in the chat. So I just want to let you know that that's a podcast that I highly recommend. I did post it in GCC as well. It's a new podcast called Future Humans that Annalo Smithson and Jean Houston are doing. And their first interview is with Mariana Bosan. And it's in the chat. And I just wanted to make you aware of it. And see you next week.
Yeah, great to have you. Yeah, I also have to check out, just before I go, I shared in the GCC chat, which I think is almost a quote of something Doug said 2 weeks ago. And I think it relates to what we're talking about. When looking at the process of co-creation in recent times, it can be noticed that the intangible, ephemeral, energetic, experiential dimensions of living beings co-creating in an ever-changing, constantly shifting, moving, flowing reality as a dynamic process, which is about the verb dimensions of co-creation and essentially about energetic flows and balances as a living process, has been left out. I think that's almost a quote or something he said 2 weeks ago, and I think it's really central, this issue. And I think it's something to do with the fact that it's difficult to measure it. So I hope at least I made that point clear.
Hey, Glenn, can I say two things before you leave? Because I was going to
Yeah.
say this again, but you say you're going to leave now, so I'm going to say
Okay.
it before 10 o'clock, okay? Or my time, 10 o'clock. One is, and I put in the text, there's a method to my madness. And I am aware that I am more pokey in the last few months and weeks than I have been the first 3 or 4 years, if that were possible, okay? And I think for me, there's a purpose to it. For me, the purpose really is to understand truth and how truth can play a more significant role and impact in conversations, in collaboration, in deliberations, in model making, in interactions, and in alignment. So to me, the truth is shaken, it's threatened by a number of institutions in society. Assumptions being one, dogma being another, the sources of things, being influence, culture, religion, sloppy thinking, lack of education, just a number of different ways that those things take hold over truth. It used to be that up until, I believe, in the United States, the 50s and 60s, possibly even 70s, we were getting better and better. We're getting more and more educated. We're getting more and more people with degrees. We're getting more and more people who could actually think critically, who could actually converse critically, who could actually read well, who could actually converse with each other well. But I think in the last at least 10, if not more years, that direction has been reversed. And there's been really, really horrible and ugly influences that just expose that there's a huge part of our society that does not value truth, that does not value critical thinking, that does not value clarity. So I'm taking more and more opportunities myself to really look at those things which are not clear to me. I'm not the smartest person ever, okay? But I still try to understand things. And to the extent that I cannot, I will ask questions. And when those questions elicit emotional responses, that's telling to me. That's revealing of something other than just the words that we're using. So to me, I have consciously in the last year or at least half year, taken a new tack in conversation to really, really lean in where I do not understand, to really, really lean in where I do not sense a foundation to what is being said, and to really lean in to understand those foundations. Now, to me, the pursuit of truth is more important than whether or not I prick somebody or I rub somebody raw. If that person is rubbed raw by my questions, that's also telling. So that's why I say there is a method to my madness. And that's why I wanted to explain sort of my shift in behavior, if indeed anyone has noticed the shift in behavior over the last weeks and months. So Glenn, I really, really appreciate conversations with you. You're willing to answer my questions. Josh, you too. Mary, you too, okay? To the extent that those answers stop coming, that's when I either keep asking and then eventually give up, or I seek other places to ask those questions. So these phenomena that are difficult to define and difficult to experiment with, like consciousness, like God, like, cosmic downloading, like past lives, I'm more than willing to lean in and question and understand. And I can only do that to the extent that other people who know those areas are willing to respond to me. I can do my own experimentation, but it will take a lot longer. I'm trying to, cut that short by going to people who've done this, because I want to learn from those who've gone before me. And if those who have gone before me get emotional when I ask these questions, I will actually tilt my head and think about this and say, I wanted to say that just before the top of the hour, but Glenn, you said you were leaving, so I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I got emotional earlier was just because I was looking for this pattern. I didn't find it. I tried to find a picture on the internet, and it's just all these ad pages came up. So anyway, yeah, I gotta go, but would love to have a deep dive in sacred geometry sometimes have Josh show us some of it. I think it's a very big field.
I'll do it.
Something
12 minutes. I posted it earlier. If you save the chat, it's on there. I'm
I
happy
said
to
I'm
post
gonna
it
watch
again.
that video. I will watch that video.
I've watched hundreds, thousands. I don't know how many I've watched. I've had sacredgeometry.com made, t-shirts. So that one is pretty concise, and it's coming from like 17 to 25 other sources. So it'll just save you a lot of time. It's 12 minutes. And then from that, if you want to go further and get really crazy, it's the guys from After School who condensed it down into the 12 minutes. There's one from Randall Carlson, and it's called After School, spelled with a K, after SKOOL. And he took a 6-hour sacred geometry talk and condensed it down to 2 hours and 30 minutes and redrew the crappy drawings that he drew. So that's between those two, I can't think of any more information than you need other than 2 hours and 37 minutes. So I hope that helps.
awesome. You should share that in the GCC barn racing
The link
rig
is in the chat.
chat too, maybe. Yeah,
I got you, Glenn.
super. Have a good day, guys.
I'd just like to say that I appreciate that Sam is appreciating the relationship between emotions and learning. It's a subject I've been researching since the mid-1980s. And there's a mathematical model to those relationships, but it's not a model that most people are even aware of, or let alone think about. But there is a very deep relationship between emotional states and the state of the learning process.
I've got a question.
I'm learning that with this little one. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I wanted to think about why Elon Musk has not run for president. Why didn't he get involved in politics? He does it his own way because he's got this platform, so he doesn't have to, I guess. Over.
I couldn't understand that real well.
Try reading the transcript.
If I loved Elon Musk, I would run for president and change the environment laws.
It was pretty garbled.
I understood what you said.
The transcript wasn't clear either. Josh, what did he say?
He was saying there's a reason why Elon Musk doesn't run for president is because he has his own way of, the way I understood it was his own, are you saying this, Alex, his own way of showing his emotional needs for what is his values? In other words, he doesn't need to do that because he has his own way. I just heard you say he has his own way. So I didn't know what you meant by that.
Media, he's got media on his side. He's got the media platform. He's got his own YouTube channel and space agency. Why does he need to run for president? Unless he's that disgusted with politics.
Plus, he lives in the world of high-functioning systems, and government is not an example of a high-functioning system. It's an example of a mess.
Yeah, I never saw what a mess it was until I looked at the journal going all the way back to 1936 of everything that was posted every day of the government. I would love to post that. I mean, if you guys could take a look at it, there's actual websites to teach you how to read it. And it's govinfo.gov. And you can just, it's called the, what is it? The Federal Journal. Oh, geez, boobs. What is it? See, these are the emotions I'm talking about. I just tried to sneak outside and have a cigarette real quick. And she looked at me like, are you fucking kidding me? You're not going anywhere.
See, I look at all
And
those
she just
decisions.
dropped her basketball down the hill. Bye. Say bye to your basketball. But yeah, it's emotion. And then she fell on her head this morning, and I was waiting for her to cry, and I didn't react. And she just looked at me like she doesn't know what she's supposed to do. Hey, we're talking about you. And then she goes, ow, like it just hurt. Like she didn't cry. And then other times she barely hits herself and she cries. It's like emotions are learned, I think, from the people around you.
Expression of emotions is learned.
Expression, thank you. Because she looked at me going out the door and she was like, express herself, but then when she got no reaction from me, she had to express in a way that I heard her. Like right now, what is it?
If babies react to whether or not
Yeah.
they get your attention. The babies react and respond, and they observe your reactions.
Mm-hmm.
If they get a reaction, they're learning something.
But she spent 5 months of her life. She's only 8 months old. So the first 5 months was facial. And even right now, that's the whole way she communicates, is by looking at tiny cues of the 180 muscles in my face. When I change a slight bit, like she'll stare at my face and I will not move a muscle and she won't move a muscle. And we play this game where she's waiting for me to move the muscle to see. What are you looking at, Oops?
Can you raise one eyebrow?
I'm trying. Sorry, the light's not right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an important function for the neurogenesis.
You
of
can.
the brain. The brain,
I
I
can't
know.
raise one eyebrow.
the brain develops faster if it has to learn to split the muscle groups between two, like with your eyebrows and, you know, doing opposite things with your fingers like this. Motor dexterity in the motor cortex. I don't know if that leads to development in the other cortexes. I hope it does. Musicians are no better at politics than artists, than filmmakers or journalists.
Well, politics is just how well you can keep a secret with one group and then hold it until the right moment when you have to tell that secret to another group to affect another group. So it's just all about holding information and timing, much like a comedian, except the joke is, haha, you're fired, or haha, your law doesn't get passed, or haha, that thing you wanted, you're not going to get it. Okay, Google, pause. So it's
Comedy.
it's a different art form, but it is an art form nonetheless. Politics of manipulating one group to do or believe the thing that you want them to do or believe.
Multi-dimensional chess game.
Yeah. And make people think that you know that I'm going to do this, and we all are going in this direction, and then really, haha, psych, we went in this direction. And you just told everyone the wrong thing.
Biden says he thinks that Putin's going to invade Kiev. Example. Biden says that he thinks that Putin is going to invade Ukraine.
And Biden says the best electric car company in the United States by far, without a doubt, is General Motors.
He actually corrected himself on that one.
I saw the correction this week, but it was a weak correction.
Wasn't that General Motors a black hole bucket for the bailout?
And you know why he corrected, Sam, by the way? Do you know the politics behind that?
Didn't all the Tesla guys gang up on him?
Nope. It was his niece, Missy, that got put into a position of power from NHTSA into GM. So they told him that he had to do that. There's a lot of politics in this electric car revolution game and petroleum game. But his niece got hired. And she told him to do it.
I'd like to know how General Motors treats their most vulnerable workers.
Morphic influence.
What do you want to do?
Okay, well, while there's a lull in the conversation, let me go back to what Glenn quoted from Doug. This notion that there are unexplainable, intangible dynamics. I actually think that those are not unnoticed. Those are definitely acknowledged. And that's really what I personally think collaborology is about. And yet, it's about what happens when we are in groups attempting to do something with focus. So Doug may be talking about history, that may be true. I'm just talking about it has been noticed and it is being studied. And I think that we here have created thousands of hours of case study material in this.
Yeah.
Over.
Yeah, we go over and over the focusing on agreements. And that's interesting because there's not, I don't see many agreements developing. And it's important that we have this mission statement that, or Barry talked about a general assertion of some direction and motive for the GCC group. The movement that has no direction needs this statement of aims that it becomes part of the agreement. Then we can then other actions can stem from that. But we need that basic direction up front. Leaning out to, I mean, the agreements that we make are not binding unless we make them binding. That is the
Okay, Google, unpause.
initial statement. It's an impasse at the GCC. The lack of foresight in the founders' motivation when they created the direction, the movement's aims and statement of what it wants to achieve, what it's trying, what it's attempting to do.
Alex?
If we're attempting to unite people in a group, tribe.
Alex, bring up the transcript and read back what the transcript thinks you said and see if you can understand what the transcripts wrote down, because it's a sequence of words that don't make sentences.
Yeah, sometimes the transfer is broken down by the bit as information dropped from packets on the.
But it's not just the transcript, it's my own ears too.
So often
I'm no better than the transcript.
What you hear spoken is not what the person said because of the dropouts and the static picked up along the line. If you're standing face to face with somebody, those errors wouldn't be there. So it's not technical. It's not a technical issue. It's an emotional issue. It's to do with our desire for truth and honesty and justice. It's about the importance of a well-functioning democracy because when democracies function well, they do work quite well. They're not. It's broken in the United States. The one they're using in the United States is not correctly a democracy because in a democracy, the decisions are made by the vote of 100% involved. It's 100% of the people involved in the country in the voting process. If there's only 40%, it's not a democracy. Right? Democracy is in the dictionary, and it says the majority of the people are guiding the guidelines and making the rules for the leaders. The majority of the people means 100%. All who can vote should vote. America's only got 55% of people voting.
Good vote.
I
I can't make out what you're saying.
You can't call that democracy. And it's occurring because it's written into the Constitution. You have the freedom to opt out of the voting process. It's constitutional right to refuse a vote. That's madness. That's put in there by the capitalists who want to control it because they know, the experts know that the people who are least likely to vote are the working people, the poor, the uneducated. They're at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's a fact nobody can really escape. Anyway, I've got to go and work on my audio issues.
Speaking of occasional words, if you remember Carl Sagan's Cosmos, he began every program with the definition of the word cosmos. He said, the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Perfectly fine definition, although it's quite vague because it's not, I mean, it's by definition vague. But then if you go all the way back to a storybook character who may or may not have been a real person, there's a storybook character called Moses who claims to have spoken to God. And in speaking to God, he says, tell me your real name. And the answer that Moses gets back is from God, I am all that is, or ever was, or ever will be.
So God is the cosmos, Barry?
Well, let's just put it this way. God defines himself in exactly the same definition, word for word, as Carl Sagan assigns to the word cosmos.
Right, because he probably read the Bible.
Well, Sagan is an atheist, but yeah, he may have read the Bible.
No,
He's an
but
atheist.
yeah, I'm sure. I'm not saying he's quoting scripture as much as he found that definition to be also quite apt
Right.
for the way he wanted to explain it.
Yeah.
It worked for him, basically.
And for me, if I wanted to come up with a poetic word to telescope that definition, I would say the name of God translates in English as the process of becoming.
Yes.
And the process of becoming is a perfectly good English phrase, but it's also vague because you don't know in advance what's going to come out of the process of becoming after it's done becoming whatever it's going to become.
And I've heard you say that, and that to me makes perfect sense because there's this thing about creation and the whole everything and nothing and chicken and egg syndrome and free will versus not free will. And, the whole thing of like, what is before the start? But to me, I think that's because of this weird construct of past, present, and future. And if you take that away, it's all becoming. What you just said, it makes perfect sense. It's in a process of flux of being.
Right. Yeah. So I am becoming whatever it is I'm going to come out to be when I'm done becoming what I'm becoming. It's a sort of a self-defining process, but it's also very vague because it doesn't predict anything.
Yeah, and that's why I love Eastern philosophy is they don't always use time in the same construct. So something can be the start and the beginning at the same time.
Right.
And it can have that circular holographic nature of its, that's where I think English, like I wish everyone would read the first 3 chapters of Wholeness in the Implicate Order by David Bohm, where he breaks down the syntax of language and shows why it's useful for fragmentation in scientific thinking and the scientific method, but not useful for understanding the becoming of the universe itself, of the wholeness and the implicate order itself.
When a scientist sets out to construct a model of what's being observed, before he's finished, he doesn't know what the model is going to become. He's in the process of constructing a model. The model becomes itself.
Through testing, through constant iteration and testing. Yeah.
Does the model agree with observation going forward?
You're talking about the blind watchmaker.
Who are you screaming at? Sorry, excuse me.
Is my audio working all right now?
Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock. I don't know if Sam wants to close this out.
Yeah, I think I gotta go.
I
Did you get stuck? Yeah, I gotta go. She's not feeling it.
Anyway.
See you guys later. Thank you, Sam. Alex,
I wonder if Caleb wants to say anything goodbye before we close out.
I'm reading a text from Sam that says, I really can't understand Alex's audio except for occasional words.
You're very garbled, Alex. You need to work on that. You want to become clear. Hi. You are there.
Yay! Well, I really enjoyed listening to you guys A few of you had articulated a lot better than I probably could have regarding this whole topic. And that's it. I drank way too much coffee and my heart is like racing right now. So I'm gonna try to meditate a little bit.
I think we haven't heard about your Disneyland trip for last Sunday.
You guys haven't heard a lot of things. Well, just adding my 2 cents here about the whole sacred geometry. I was going to chime in to say that the Polynesians used it to be able to navigate. You know, and aside from that, I could give no other explanation, but just sort of lean into where the conversation was going. So I really appreciated it. You know, I think more people in this world should be able to lean in and talk about things that matter. Anyway, aside from that, Disneyland was great. I had got a promotion.
Yay.
So I know, thank you. I just signed the paperwork yesterday, which was awesome. And then next month, my salary will kick in, and it's really nice. Had to change my taxes so that I don't get, you know, I have to pay at the end of the year. And Disneyland was kind of my celebration for my promotion. And it was also because now I'll be traveling actually for work and not for dance. So I'm trying to figure that out. And I won't be going to Washington, D.C. with my son like I'd hoped, but that's okay. I mean, saved a couple of $1,000s there. And yeah, speaking of, Josh mentioned the comment period, and I found that to be really helpful because actually it kind of ties into what I'll be doing. So I'm working with my organization, a sector of their program to be able to, you know, lobby and pay attention to certain bills that would affect what we do, which is really cool. So last night I spent some time looking at a bill that they support, and looking at a couple of grants that could help the people that we serve. So yeah. What do you want to know about Disneyland, Sam? I don't know if I answered your question.
Last time I went to Disneyland, I think I stood in so many lines. I think I maybe went on maybe just 3 or 4 rides. I'm wondering, you know, how many rides you can actually get to these days when you actually spend an entire day at Disneyland.
Isn't there a premium ticket where you don't have to stand in line?
Yes.
You know,
So now
the basic
Disneyland
entry is over $100, isn't it?
I don't know.
Yeah. One park per day. So over here in California, I don't know if you guys know this, there is Disneyland and California Adventure, Disney's California Adventure. And if you buy a park hopper, that could cost almost $200, depending on what day it is. So if it's like, you know, in the summertime, it's usually close to $200. If it's, you know, a holiday, it's usually close to that. But if you just go for one park per day, it's about $119 for, you know, a weekday that's not associated with any type of holiday. And then now they have what's called the Genie Plus. That is an app that you purchase along with your ticket that gives you access to the rides so that you don't have to wait. So more of the popular rides have like a very long wait time, but with $20 extra that you spend on a $119 ticket for one park, you get that Genie Plus. And so you know, purchase kind of the right to wait in a shorter line. Not to mention, for the extremely popular ones, you have to pay what's called a la carte lightning lane. So in addition to the $20, So that's $139 from one park. You can purchase a lightning lane ticket for anywhere between $7 to $20 per person. So you're spending at least $150 just for the ticket and just to be able to not stand in a long line. So when we went, we actually went on a million rides because I purchased that for my kids because I don't want to stand in line and listen to them, you know, whine or have to juggle that whole thing, because you can be in Disneyland all day and go on like 4 rides if you don't purchase that option. So it's gotten crazy expensive, very busy. The food like makes you gassy all day long. For some strange reason, Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, is right. You just, you know, crave this food for some reason. And yeah, you know, it's still the happiest place on earth, I suppose. Everyone loves it, including us. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm impressed that you can go to a million rides. Then it sounds
Yeah.
perfect.
Well, the kids went on like the Incredicoaster, which is their roller coaster in Disney's California Adventure, about 12 times. So it's like a huge glorified amusement park.
I'll tell you how old I am. I think back when I went, those few times I went, the ride to go on was the Matterhorn. That was it.
Oh my gosh, yes. No.
And that was
40
it.
years
That was the pinnacle of all the rides.
40 years ago.
Yeah. No, 50,
Yeah.
50.
You know what? Honestly, Disney does a really good job. I mean, the place is clean. You have a ton of people just cleaning up after the horses, cleaning up trash that's there. You know, they often refurbish the rides throughout the year. So they just make sure everything's nice and clean and sparkly and new. They change up the projections now, you know, so if you go on one ride one day, the next day, the same ride might be kind of different. And they're basing it on, you know, a lot of the popular kid themes like the Avengers, you know, the new Pirates of the Caribbean series. And lots of adults are into that.
Is there still, it's a small, small world?
Yes, there's still It's a Small World. It's still the same. That's usually the ride that I go on if I want to go to sleep for about 10 minutes.
It's a boring ride.
No, it's still very entertaining, but it's just nice and cool, and you know,
Yeah.
it's good for us adults with kids to just chill out for a few minutes before we go back into mayhem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm about to go get some coffee myself. I think I need it today.
Oh, you can have some of my energy. My heart is like racing. This is awesome.
Right, send me some coffee then.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's great listening to you guys, and I look forward to our conversation tomorrow, Sam.
Well, let me know if my ranting is a bit excessive, okay? Just tell me candidly. All of you guys.
Oh.
They had a problem with the rides in Australia, especially the waterworks, where people were killed because the government wasn't inspecting the safety features very well. So that's a problem.
You know, I have to say that Disneyland is political in like a really small way.
Yeah,
So regarding the mask mandates and the vaccinations, they will allow anybody and everybody there. It doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not.
you can't, yeah, because the vaccines don't stop you getting COVID.
Well, they are also very pro-gay. They even have, and then pro a lot of different things. Like they have what's called Bat Day, which, I guess if you're kind of an emo person or you're somebody that's into goth or something, you can actually go in there. So it's very interesting.
The children are on those rides, so we want them to be safe.
Oh, and by the way, if you ask what their capacity is, especially during the pandemic, they won't tell you. They're not allowed to tell you. So that place could be packed to the nines, and you'll never know because all of the cast members aren't allowed to say. Anyhow, I should let you guys all know. Yep, there's my grocery delivery. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
They're clamping down on the facts and the truth is dystopian. It's a dystopian move by the government. So just think, people should all be aware of that, especially if they work for the government. Could cause a revolt by the frontline workers, the frontline soldiers.
Okay, looks like we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and end the session if everybody has said their piece.
Yeah, I'm going. I've saved the transcript
Yeah,
for my own archive.
ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, bye-bye.